Well, new polling suggests the majority of people living in Japan are concerned about the safety of the Tokyo Olympics. Despite antivirus measures, including regular athlete testing and a ban on foreign spectators, more than 80% of those surveyed do not want the Games to go ahead as planned. 43% want to cancel the event. 40% want a further postponement. Let's go live now to our Asia correspondent, Adrian Brown. Adrian, this Olympic Games has been quite unpopular internally for some time.
Laura, that's right. The Japanese government is really caught between a rock and a very hard place, because if it goes ahead with these, Olympics, it's damned. If it doesn't go ahead with these Olympics, it's damned. The danger for the Japanese government is this: it has invested something like 26 million US dollars, more than 30 million Australian dollars in these Olympics. It is something that is of enormous prestige value to Japan. But epidemiologists, not just in Australia, but also in New Zealand, are warning that there is a real danger that the Olympics could become a super spreader event, because we had 7,000 defections just on one day last week. The vaccination rate is an anemic, 2%. So if the Japanese do decide to go ahead with these games, in spite of growing numbers of people in Japan saying these games should not be happening, if it does go ahead with these games and it becomes, as I say, a super spreader event, then these Olympics will be tarnished and tainted for years to come. But if Japan decides to cancel these Olympics and the IOC and Japanese government continue to insist they will happen, then of course they're going to be left with an enormous bill. And remember, the IOC will then find itself in the position of having to refund the rights holders around the world. And they may not have that money to refund. So this could be actually a really defining moment for the Olympics. And remember, just, in February next year, China will be hosting the Winter Games, and he doesn't want that negativity to bleed over into the Winter Games.
Yeah, indeed. And it's interesting that you say if Japan decides to not go ahead with these Olympics, because that's the decision maker really in all of this. Many people might think that the IOC would decide to cancel it or postpone it, but it's really down to the Japanese government because of money.
Well, in a way, Laura, it may be actually out of the Japanese government and the IOC's hands. It actually could come down to the athletes themselves. Remember last March when athletes in Australia and Canada said, there's no way we're going to compete in the Olympics in Tokyo in July 2020. That forced the Japanese government to postpone the Games for another year. And, I think a lot of athletes around the world who've been training so hard, remember, for these Olympics, are saying, well, I want to participate in these games, but is it worth jeopardizing my health? So I think ultimately the decision will come down to the athletes themselves. And that's the decision, of course, that's going to have to be made, not just in the next few weeks, but in the next few days.
Indeed, because we are getting closer and closer. It starts at the end of July. Are there any countries that have signalled their reluctance to travel to Japan?
So far, no. One or two individual athletes have expressed their concerns, but no one has so far come out and said, we're not going to go to Tokyo.